Getting started. Introduction. Some time ago, I had the opportunity to meet William Cooper and his wife Annie. It was part of my job to verify whether this man did indeed speak the truth or was just another person seeking fame and fortune. What I found was a rugged, bulldog-driven individual who was kind, thoughtful, and tender-hearted. He was truly concerned about you and your welfare. Bill knew that people were badly informed by a society which spoon-feeds you deception until there is no distinction between fiction and reality. He sees what many others see happening, and he is not afraid to do something about it. There are many who do not want you to know what Bill has to say. They have tried many times to stop him from saying it. The scars on his face and the loss of his leg are his badges of sincerity on your behalf. No one becomes popular by telling people the truth. History records what happened to the true prophets of the past. However, some have listened to their warnings and were not caught off guard. Others have put their heads in the sand and refused to listen. Bill has it together and has put it together for you, so you can also be one of the informed of the world. A well-informed person can make the right decision. William Cooper has my vote of approval because I cared enough to find out who the man is. Now is your opportunity. There have been many related sequential coincidences all throughout my life. Incidences that by themselves would have led nowhere. Statistically, the odds against the same or a related sequence of events happening to one individual are astronomically high. It is this series of incidences that have convinced me that God has had a hand in my life. I do not believe in fate. I do not believe in accidents. I cannot and will not accept the theory that long sequences of unrelated accidents determine world events. It is inconceivable that those with power and wealth would not band together with a common bond, a common interest, and a long-range plan to decide and direct the future of the world. For those with the resources to do otherwise would be totally irresponsible. I know that I would be the first to organize a conspiracy to control the outcome of the future if I were such a person and a conspiracy did not yet exist. I would do it in an attempt to ensure the survival of the principles in which I believe, the survival of my family, my survival, and the survival of the human race, if for no other reason. I believe, therefore, that a grand game of chess is being played on a level that we can barely imagine, and we are the pawns. Pawns are valuable only under certain circumstances and are frequently sacrificed to gain an advantage. Anyone who has studied military strategy is familiar with the concept of sacrifice. Those who have seriously studied history have probably discovered the real reason we go to war on a regular scheduled basis. Before reading this book, I advise you to play at least 2 complete games of chess. You must learn the rules they play by. You must realize objectively that some pieces are more valuable than others, and that the king is the most valuable of all. You cannot learn reality if you get caught up in the fantasy that it's not fair. You must come to know that the ultimate outcome of the game is the only thing that counts. You were lied to when you were told that it does not matter whether you win or lose. It's how you play the game. Winning in the world of the elites is everything. Indeed, it is the only thing. The power elite intend to win. My research has shown at this point that the future laid out for us may be just about impossible to change. I do not agree with the means by which the powerful few have chosen for us to reach the end. I do not agree that the end is where we should end at all. But unless we can wake the people from their sleep, nothing short of civil war will stop the planned outcome. I base that statement not on defeatism, but on the apathy of the majority of the American people. 25 years ago, I would have believed otherwise, but 25 years ago, I was also sound asleep. We have been taught lies. Reality is not at all what we perceived it to be. We cannot survive any longer by hanging on to the falsehoods of the past. Reality must be discerned at all costs if we are to be a part of the future. Truth must prevail in an instance, no matter who hurts or who helps. If we are to continue to live upon this earth, at this point, what we want may no longer matter. It is what we must do to ensure our survival that counts. The old way is in the certain process of destruction, and a new world order is beating down the door. To cling to the past is guaranteed suicide. To remain apathetic is assured enslavement. To learn the truth and then act upon it is the only means of survival at this moment. To shrug off the information contained in this book and to disregard its warning will result in the complete destruction of the Republic of the United States of America. You will never get a second warning or a second chance. Like it or not, this is it. Stark reality. You can no longer turn your head, ignore it, and pretend it's not true. Say, it can't happen to me, run or hide. The wolf is at the door. I fear for the little ones, the innocents who are already paying for our mistakes. There exists a great army of occupationally orphaned children. They are attending government-controlled daycare centers and latchkey kids who are running wild in the streets, and the lopsided, emotionally wounded children of single welfare mothers, born only for the sake of more money in the monthly check. Open your eyes and look at them, for they are the future. In them I see the sure and certain destruction of this once proud nation. In their vacant eyes I see the death of freedom. They carry with them a great emptiness, and someone will surely pay a great price for their suffering. If we do not act in concert with each other and ensure that the future becomes what we need it to be, then we will surely deserve whatever fate awaits us. I believe with all my heart that God put me in places and in positions throughout my life so that I would be able to deliver this warning to his people. I pray that I have been worthy and that I have done my job. This is my creed. I believe first in God, the same God in which my ancestors believed. I believe in Jesus Christ and he is my Savior. Second, I believe in the Constitution of the Republic of the United States of America. Without interpretation, as it was once written and meant to work, I have given my sacred oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I intend to fulfill that oath. Third, I believe in the family unit, and in particular, my family unit. I have sworn that I will give my life, if it is required, in defense of God, the Constitution, or my family. Fourth, I believe that any man without principles, that he is ready and willing to die for at any given moment is already dead and is of no use or consequence whatsoever. That is William Cooper, August 3rd, 1990, Camp Verde, Arizona. Here you get to see him and his daughter Dorothy in our foreword. The one thing that I find most difficult is to write about myself. It is hard to understand why some people thirst for knowledge about me. It was never my intention to be anyone's hero. I am certainly no great example upon which to base one's life. I consider myself a very average, normal kind of guy. I have some pretty good points, I have some human failings, I am proud of some of my achievements, and there are things that I wish I had not done. I'm not perfect, and I am not sure that I ever want to be, but it is certain that I do not belong on anyone's pedestal. I am a man with a message, and the message will be accepted by only a few. To those few who will understand, I am your brother. Maybe we can change the future for the better. William Moore, in his disinformation publication entitled Focus, said that I am a fundamentalist preacher. 20 years ago that would have been a compliment, but today it implies sleaziness. That is why he said it. I am not, and I have never been any kind of preacher. I am not starting a church. I am not developing a religion. I do not belong to any organizations. I do not have an entourage. There is no cult, and I am not a cult leader. No one camps out around my house. People have called radio talk shows claiming to have first-hand knowledge that I am a notorious radical right-wing extremist. Others has said they have proof that I belong to a white racist organization. Someone said that they found my name on a list of Communist Party members. A man in Los Angeles always the same voice calls when I'm on radio claiming that I'm an alcoholic. The truth is, most of my close friends and acquaintances consider themselves to be liberal Democrats. My only political stance is constitutional. My wife is Chinese. That rules out the racist propaganda. I fought the communists in Vietnam, and I will fight them again if necessary, but only on United States soil. I used to drink a lot of alcohol in my younger days. As I became older, the booze dwindled to a trickle. Now I do not drink much at all. Most of my friends have never seen me take a drink. Annie and I are fond of using wine in our cooking. The lies, no doubt, will continue. For the purpose of keeping everything in perspective, let's all understand that attempts to assassinate my character will continue, and in all probability will become worse. Rather than let that get in the way, I want you to believe everything bad that you ever hear about me. See if that changes anything that I have been trying to tell you. See if it negates any of the proof. I believe it is the easiest way to handle those attacks. You who are sincerely interested in knowing will seek out me or those who are intimately close to me. Those who do are the only ones who will ever really know who and what I am. My ancestors came from England, Scotland, and Ireland. I had relatives who fought on both sides in the Civil War, and some who fought in the Indian Wars. One of my ancestors was a horse thief in Texas. I don't know for sure, but I think he got hung for it. When I was a little boy, I heard whispers that there was some Cherokee blood in the family. Every time I asked about it, I was told to shut up. I never could figure out why everyone was afraid to talk about the Indian blood. I thought and still think that it is something of which to be proud. I have since discovered that the old folks in my family, like the old folks in almost every family, thought there was some stigma attached to being part Indian. In the old days, on the American frontier, people lived by hard rules. If you weren't accepted by your neighbors, you were more than likely to end up dead. My paternal grandmother's family, named Vance, traveled to Texas in a covered wagon and were some of the first settlers in the area of Odessa. My great-grandfather Vance was a real cowboy who eventually became one of the first oil field workers. My great-grandfather Vance told me that one of their first homes was a dugout on the prairie. My great-aunt's sister owned a photo of her father, my great-grandfather Vance, standing in front of a saloon beside his best friend. Both men had 6 guns stuck in their belts. When she was about 84 or so, she told me that my great-grandfather Vance had gone off to do some work for a rancher. It was during a particularly nasty Indian uprising. My great-grandmother was a newly married young woman at the time. She rose early one morning and saw smoke rising from the direction of one of her neighbors. Soon a war party of 5 young braves rode up to her dugout. She told me that she was scared to death, but knew if she showed it, they would kill her for sure. The Indians were hungry. Great-Grandma Vance made them get down off their ponies, dragged them inside, and fed them. They didn't harm her. After filling their stomachs, they rode off in the direction where she saw the smoke rising later that afternoon. She said that she learned later that she was the only one in the area that had not been burned out or killed. She was a very brave woman. Great-Grandma Vance died in a car accident just a short time after telling me that story. I thought it was a very strange way for her to die. She went from covered wagons to Fords and Boeing 707s. Grandma Vance saw just about everything that ever was important in this world happen in her lifetime. My paternal grandfather's family also rode across the country in a covered wagon. They strayed a little north, however, and ended up in the Indian Territory, now known as Oklahoma. They were on the front line during the Oklahoma Land Rush and succeeded in staking out 320 acres on Big Bear Creek, near what would eventually become Enid. A little town sprang up not too far away called Garber. They raised a lot of kids. I remember my great-grandmother cooking the biggest breakfast I had ever seen. We slept in real feather beds that swallowed us up. We ran to the outhouse in the middle of the night because we were embarrassed to use the chamber pot that great-grandma kept handy under every bed. In the morning, everyone would crowd around the wood stove in the kitchen or the coal stove in the parlor trying to get warm. My dad had given me a .22 rifle for Christmas, and great-grandmother's farm was the first place that I ever went hunting. I got up before the sun one morning, tiptoed downstairs, and headed out for the creek. About 2 hours later, I saw my chance and shot a quail sitting up in a tree. I strutted proudly to the farmhouse, holding the quail up for all to see. Luckily, the farmhand saw me first. He burst out laughing and asked me what I thought I was doing with that sparrow. I ran off and buried that bird and never said a word to anyone. I learned later that quails don't sit in trees. For those who may think this is to be a terrible thing, I must tell you that every boy in those days was given a rifle and taught to hunt. During hunting season, many a family managed to put aside some extra money because the boys brought home meat from the hunt. That money saved was sorely needed. It was considered a duty for a citizen to own a gun in order to carry out the intent of the Second Amendment of the Constitution. As long as the citizens owned guns, the governments could never become oppressive. My mother's family came from Scotland and settled in North Carolina. They were hard-working and thrifty folk. Most of them were poor. I never knew much about my mother's family. I don't even remember anyone talking much about them. I know that my grandmother, Nellie Woodside, was forced to give up some of her children when her husband died. There was not enough money to feed all of the kids. My mother was one of those chosen to live in a children's home until things got better. No one ever talked about my mother's father. When I asked about my grandfather, I was told, "Red was no good and you just mind your own business." I got the feeling that nobody liked him. He died before I entered this world. I was born May 6, 1943. I was reared in a military family. My father is USAF Lieutenant Colonel something. I don't know what that means. RET. Oh, retired maybe? So anyways, Milton B. Cooper. He prefers to be called Jack, the nickname given to him by the family when he was a boy. Dad began his Air Force career as a young cadet, flying biplanes, and retired as a command pilot, with thousands of hours to his credit. I have a picture of him standing in front of an old biplane in his leather jacket and his cap with the ear flaps. Here's a picture of his mother and father. Just like Snoopy wears. I can remember the pilots gathered around the kitchen table talking about the planes and telling stories. Sometimes they discussed strange things called Foo Fighters or UFOs. When we were lucky, they got out the projector and showed Kodachrome slides. That was a special treat. By the time I was 8 years old, I think I had already seen and been inside every plane the Air Force, which used to be the Army Air Force, had ever owned. I had flown in several. I had seen many of them crash and had friends who had lost their fathers. I remember one night in the Azores at Legis Fields. We were at the base theater watching a movie when the projector ground to a stop. The lights came on and a plea was made for blood donors. We knew there had been a disaster. Everyone went outside and looked down the hill at the flight line. It was literally consumed in flames. We could see men on fire running through the night. A B-29 had crashed. I forgot if it had been taking off or landing, but I will never forget the scene that was spread before me on that night. No one went back to the movie, even though we had only seen half. I was 9 years old, but felt much older. I had seen many crashes, and I would see many more in the years to come, but I never saw anything that could ever compare to the wreckage, the fire, the devastation, or the loss of life caused by the crash of that B-29. We left the Azores years later. As we climbed into the sky, I looked out the plane. I could still see pieces of the wreckage where it had been pushed away from the runways. It was that incident that gave me an appreciation of the dangers that my dad faced on a daily basis. I knew then how lucky we were to see him walk on the door. Aviation wasn't safe in those days, especially for military pilots. We all knew families that had lost someone in a crash. I didn't always love my father. He was a strict disciplinarian. My dad did not believe in spare the rod, and his belt was put to use frequently in our family. I was a very sensitive but willful child. Rules didn't mean much to me until I got caught breaking them. Many times I was the focus of his anger. Like most kids, I didn't understand. I thought he was a tyrant. Now I appreciate his upbringing. I know beyond the shadow of a doubt that without his strict discipline, we most probably would have never we most probably would have turned out bad. Now, I love my dad. He is my friend. He is an independent, gregarious, feisty, tough, confident, adventurous, sometimes overbearing, handsome big bear of a man. My mother told me that she fell in love with him because he looks like John Wayne, and he does. I have watched him progress from one who disdained any public show of affection to a man who is just as likely to hug you as shake your hand. On the other side, he has at times made me so angry that I could have punched him in the mouth, but I never have. It's damn hard for anyone to not like him. He is always up to some mischief, and I can guarantee you that no one is ever bored around my father. My mother is a real Southern lady. They used to call her kind a Southern belle. She is one of the last of a dying breed. Dovie Nell Woodside Cooper is the type of a woman that men like to dream about when they're lonely. She is the kindest, gentlest woman that I have ever known. I do not make that statement just because she is my mother. It's true. She was beautiful as a young woman, and she is beautiful now. My mother is one of those people who, once she likes you, can't be driven away. She is loyal to a fault. I have seen her during the good and during the bad times. She never flinched no matter what. It's always surprised me that she could be so tough and yet so kind, gentle and loving all at the same time. Woe to anyone who ever harms my dad or one of her children in her presence. And she is the best cook who ever stepped foot in any kitchen that was ever built. I love my mother probably more than anyone else in this world. I have a brother, Ronnie, and a sister, Connie. They are fraternal twins, 2 years younger than me. We were closer than most siblings when we were children because we spent so much of our time in foreign countries, where oftentimes we found ourselves unable to communicate except with each other. We had school friends, but school was often many miles from where we lived. We had few toys. Most of them were things that Mother could give us, such as spool, cigar boxes, strings, or anything else that we could find to keep us occupied. Every Christmas was a delight because we always got some real toys. Ronnie and I had a propensity to see how things worked. However, so they never lasted long. Everything we wore, including shoes, was ordered from the Sears catalog. It was the wish book. We never tired of looking through it. We alternately loved each other, hated each other, fought each other, and defended each other, as I guess all kids do. Ronnie, his wife Susie, and their daughter Jennifer live in Garber, Oklahoma, where Ron sells John Deere farm equipment. Ron and Susie built their house with their own hands. As far as I know, they intend to live in that house until they die. Ronnie served as an officer in the Army, in Vietnam here in the Silver Star. We haven't seen each other since 1976, after he came to visit me in the hospital after I lost my leg. Nevertheless, I love him and I miss him a lot. Neither one of us can afford to travel much unless it's business, but one of these days soon, I'm going to surprise him with a visit. Connie has shown me pictures, and Ron looks just like my great-grandfather. Almost every picture that I've seen shows Ron in chaps, a Stetson, boots, and either near or on a horse. I guess that is about how it should be, as Ronnie always wanted to be a cowboy when he was a child. Connie has really turned out to be a fine woman. When she was little, I sometimes liked her and sometimes didn't. Little boys don't usually have much use for little girls. Since we only had each other to play with, however, Ronnie and I loved her a lot. But little boys just can't ever admit anything like that. I remember Connie always followed me everywhere I went. I couldn't get rid of her no matter how hard I tried. Her devotion and loyalty made me love her all the more. Of course, I pretended that she was a pain in the ass. As we grew older and began to realize that there was a really big difference between boys and girls, Connie began to take on an air of mystery. From that time until I was about 18, she baffled me completely. I remember when she was about 13 or so, she would throw temper tantrums when she got angry. She would stomp her feet and scream, run to her room, and slam the door. Ronnie and I thought it was a great show, but couldn't for love or money understand why she did it. When we asked Mom, she would just shake her head and say hormones. Connie grew up to be a beautiful woman and eventually married her high school sweetheart, Gus Deaton. They had 2 beautiful children, Janice and Chrissy. Janice is very much like Connie, loving and loyal. Chrissy is different. She's a redhead who loves to party. I guess Chrissy represents a freedom of spirit more than anything else. Connie's marriage deteriorated, and no one could figure out what was happening until Gus was diagnosed as having brain tumors. It was tragic. Everyone really loved Gus. As his disease progressed and he began to do crazy things, people just drifted away. I have always nurtured a very special love for Chrissy. She never deserted her father. When no one else could stand to be around him, Chrissy chose to go live with him. So he won't be lonely, she said. Even now, I get all choked up when I think of that little red-headed girl going to live with her sick father, so he won't be lonely. His behavior was such that no one else could stand to be around him. At least that is what I'm told. It wasn't Gus's fault that he became ill, and I've always felt it just wasn't fair to Connie, the children, or Gus. I've since learned that life is seldom fair. Connie eventually remarried and moved to Austin, Texas, where she has established herself as a valuable employee of a large bank. Her husband is an executive for McGraw-Hill. His name, coincidentally, is Ron. We all really like Ron McClure, especially Dad, who has formed a close friendship with him. My sister has really blossomed into a wonderful woman. She has become one of my dearest and closest friends. She has grown to be so much a part of me that even now I sometimes get a feeling to look behind me to see if that little girl is still there. I feel a great loss when I see that it's only Sugar Bear, my faithful dog, but then I love him too, so I can't complain. I graduated in 1961 from Yamata High School in Japan. That fall, I enlisted in the Air Force. I really wanted to go into the Navy, but I had always had a tendency towards car sickness and seasickness. I attended basic at Lackland Air Force Base, Texas, and Technical School for Aircraft and Missile Hydraulics. Not sure if I said that right. At Amarillo Air Force Base. Upon completion, I was ordered to the 495th Bomb Wing of the Strategic Air Command at Shepherd Air Force Base, just outside Wichita Falls. The name was later changed to the 4,245th Bomb Wing. Don't ask me how. In just a short time, I had gone from a skinny kid who didn't know much about anything, even though I thought I did, to an airman who had a secret security clearance and worked on B-52 bombers, KC-135 refueling aircraft, and Minuteman missiles. I saw real atomic bombs. I worked around them on a daily basis. Because of that, I had to wear a dosimeter just in case I was exposed to radiation. In those days, we were the elite of the Air Force, and we knew it. I received a letter of commendation for my work. In due time, I was awarded the National Defense Medal of the Air Force Good Conduct Medal. I think everyone was awarded the National Defense Medal, so that no one would be embarrassed stating information with nothing on their chest. It was during this time that I met a couple of sergeants who kind of adopted me. We went out to the clubs together and usually ended up chasing women and drinking a lot of beer. They told me several stories about being attached to a special unit that recovered crash flying saucers. Sergeant Meese told me that he had been on one operation that transported a saucer so large that a special team went before them, lowering all telephone poles and fence posts. Another team followed and replaced them. They moved it only at night. It was kept parked and covered somewhere off the road during the day. Since we were always half-tanked when these stories came out, I never believed them. Sergeants were known to tell some tall tales to younger guys like me. On November 22nd, 1963, I was on duty as CQ, charge of quarters, for the Field of Maintenance Squadron. Most of the men were out on the flight line working. The barracks orderlies had been assigned their tasks, the first sergeant was gone somewhere, and I was alone. I turned on the orderly room TV to watch the live broadcast of the president's motorcade in Dallas. I was not prepared for what I saw. I stared in disbelief as the events unfurled in front of my eyes. I knew that something had happened, but what? I had seen and heard the assassination, but my mind was not accepting it. I kept staring at the set to discover what it was that had happened when slowly the realization crept over me. A numbness spread up my arms and legs. I saw what happened. The hair stood up on the back of my neck and a chill went down my spine. President Kennedy had been shot right in front of my eyes. At that point, huge tears began to stream down my face. Waves of emotions rushed through my body. I felt that I had to do something, so I picked up the direct line to the command center. I choked back the tears. When the command duty officer answered, I told him the president had just been shot in Dallas. There was a pause. He asked me, "How do you know that he has been shot?" I told him that I watched it on television, and then he hung up the phone. I was numb all over. A few minutes later, the command duty officer called back and ordered a red alert at DEFCON 2. Defense Condition 2 meant war was imminent. The roar of jet engines could already be heard as the alert crews taxied their planes toward the runway. I was scared shitless as I ran from the barracks to barracks, routing out the night shift and those who had the day off. We had been told that we had about 15 minutes to launch all of our planes before the first atomic bomb would hit us in the event that the Russians had launched an attack. I didn't even lock up the orderly room. I just jumped in the first car I saw, rode to the SAC pound, and reported to my red alert duty station. For the next 3 days, I slept under the belly of a B-52 bomber, staring at the Armageddon that hid just inside the closed bomb bay door. We thought the shit had really finally hit the fan. It was great relief when the alert was ended. I left the Air Force with an honorable discharge in 1965. In December of the same year, I joined the Navy. I'd always loved the ocean. I'd wanted to be a sailor since I was a little boy. Seasick or not, I made up my mind to follow my dream. I was sent to the Naval Training Center in San Diego for boot camp. Because of my prior Air Force experience, I was made the recruit chief of company commander. I was allowed to keep my same rank and pay grade. We had a good bunch of guys in my company, and we had a great company commander, Chief Campbell, chief electrician's mate. He turned the company over to me. The chief was a good man. He was only interested in teaching us what we needed to know and in keeping us out of trouble. Unlike most boot camp instructors, Chief Campbell had no axe to grind and wasn't trying to prove anything to himself or anyone else. He was truly our friend. During boot camp, I volunteered for submarines. My sense of adventure was very strong. I was accepted, and upon completion of basic training, was ordered to the USS Tiru SS-416 at the submarine base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Spitfire and damnation, no one could possibly be that lucky. I couldn't believe my eyes when I read my orders. Here I was fulfilling my dream of being in the Navy. I got exactly what I asked for the first time that I asked for it, which was extremely rare in any branch of military service. And to top it all off, I was being sent to Hawaii, the land of tropical paradise. I was in seventh heaven. I landed in Hawaii with no time to play and took a cab directly to the sub base. My submarine was nowhere to be found. I kept asking people until I found someone who told me that my boat, subs are called boats in the Navy, was not at the sub base but in dry dock in the Pearl Harbor in the Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard. I hailed another cab. The cab driver dropped me off at the head of the pier. The cab driver dropped me off at the head of a pier that looked like it had never been cleaned up after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. It was covered with what appeared to be hoses, huge electrical cables, rusting metal of every conceivable size and shape that you can imagine. The air was rank with the smell of diesel, welding fumes, paint, and steel. If there is hell on earth, I thought this has to be it. I walked up the pier, over the edge, and looked down into the dry dock. There, stripped of all dignity, lying naked and cut cleanly in half, was my boat, the USS Teru. Men were scrambling all over it. They looked like ants swarming over a dead grasshopper. Brilliant flashes of light, brighter than the sun, drove sparks high into the air and then down on a beautiful flow to the bottom of the dock. I couldn't believe my eyes. Someone actually expected me to go out to sea, then underwater in what appeared to me to be a motley collection of cut-up rusting metal scavenged from some satanic junkyard, stuck together by demons with welding torches. My luck had just ran out. I reported to the barracks barge, moored in the water on the other side of the pier, and was given a hammock for when I had the duty. Then I was sent to the sub-base barracks, where I was assigned a rack and a locker. I wanted to go into Honolulu, but quickly discovered non-quals did not rate liberty. It was getting worse. The next few months were spent sanding, painting, lifting, and learning the boat. The men of the crew, except for the chief cook, were great. The chief cook was drunk every minute of the day. He didn't like me, so I didn't get much to eat. His dislike stemmed from my first morning when I walked into the galley and watched as the other crew members ordered their breakfast. When there was an opening, I stepped up and asked for eggs over easy. That's when the chief hit the overhead and vowed that I would never eat a meal in his mess decks. He wasn't kidding either. The only time after that morning that I got anything to eat out of that galley was when the chief cook was ashore. To this day, I still don't know what I did wrong. I could have gone to the captain, but if I had done that, I might as well have put in for a transfer at the same time. It wasn't long, though, before I was able to locate where he hid his booze. I made his life miserable from that moment on. I won't tell you what I laced his vodka with, but it wasn't anything you'd ever want to drink, believe me. I kept that chief so sick that he was transferred off the boat for medical reasons. I didn't want to hurt him, but it was either get rid of him or starve to death. I made up my mind that chief or no chief, I wasn't going to go to sea on a boat that wouldn't feed me. I didn't relish going to sea with a drunk chief in charge of closing the main induction valve when the boat made a dive. When a submarine goes underwater, certain valves must be closed, or the boat will flood with water and everyone will drown. The main induction is the most important of those valves. It was the cook's duty to close it, because the valve was in the galley on the board of the USS Teru. I made two especially close friends while on the Teru, a black seaman named Lincoln Loving and an American Indian seaman we called Geronimo. The three of us were inseparable. Lincoln was best man at my first marriage. Of the three, Geronimo was the most experienced seaman, so he taught Lincoln to me. He knew everything there was to know about the boat, rope, paint, and a whole lot of other things that a man had to know to survive in the Navy. I knew the most about getting along in the military, so I taught Geronimo and Lincoln. Lincoln knew every really good spot on the island where we could have a good time, so he led the Liberty Party. Three things really stand out in my mind about the time that I spent on the Teru. The first was an incident that occurred during a test dive while we were creeping along at about 3 or 4 knots at a depth of 600 feet off the island of Oahu. Lincoln and I had just been relieved from watch and were in the after battery talking when we were knocked off our feet. We heard a loud clang forward and felt the boat lunge to port. Then we heard a sound that made our blood run cold. I could literally feel the blood drain from my face as I listened to whatever it was that we hit scrape along the starboard side of the hold. Lincoln and I froze. We held our breath as metal screeched upon metal. I thought it would never end. No one moved anywhere. Finally, after what seemed a lifetime, the boat lurched and the noise disappeared aft. If it had pierced the hold, none of us would be alive today. We never found out what it was. When we returned to Pearl, divers went down to have a look. When they surfaced, they reported that the starboard bow plane was damaged and the hole was gouged all along the starboard side from bow to stern. From bow to stern. We went in for repairs. In a couple of days, we were good as new, but I certainly had an entirely different perspective on life. The second thing that stands out happened to another boat that had been out participating in torpedo attack exercises with another submarine. I remember seeing the boat entering the harbor with a large tarp over the conning tower. I could see something holding the tarp on each side of the tower, but I couldn't see what it was. Later, Geronimo, Lincoln, and I walked over where the boat was berthed and looked under the tarp. The other boat in the exercise had scored a direct hit. What we saw was a torpedo sticking completely through the sail. We started laughing. Then we each looked at each other and decided it wasn't so funny after all. This submarine business was not quite as attractive as I thought. Number 3 happened during a transit between the Portland-Seattle area and Pearl Harbor. I was the port looking during the afternoon watch, 1,200-1,600 hours. Geronimo was the starboard lookout, and Ensign Ball was the OOD, officer of the deck. We were about 10 knots on the surface, and the three of us were on the bridge in the conning tower. It was a bright day, but the sun was obscured by a low layer of clouds. It was cool. We had a bit of fun when someone below requested permission to put a man on deck forward to get something that was needed from the waterproof deck locker. The locker was under the deck plate of all the way up on the bow near the forward torpedo room escape trunk. Geronimo and I laughed when Ensign Ball gave his approval. He really shouldn't have, because we were running a pressure wave over the bow. When we saw who it was that they had sent on deck, we roared with laughter. We looked down over the side of the sail at the deck level door just as it popped open, and Seaman Lincoln Leving stuck his head out. He did not look happy. Lincoln reached down and put the runner in the safety track in the deck, fastened the safety belt around his waist, and grabbing the handrail, stepped out on deck. He looked up at us with that "don't you laugh at me" look that he did so well. It took him a few minutes to get up the nerve to let go of the handrail and begin to make his way forward against the wind and the pitching deck. Gingerly, he crept forward until he was just at the point where the pressure wave was rolling off the deck when the bow heaved free of the water on its cyclical upswing.